Good morning, everyone. In my particular world, I'm thrilled to see that we have a real celebrity here with us. You may not know who she is, but she's a celebrity to me. Her name's Callie Yarmacht, and she was the first Digger child born to Billy and Joni Yarmacht, Billy Batman, or the Bat People as we called them. And Richard Bradigan honored her by writing a book of poems called Plant This Book, and the poems were written on seed packets, flowers and vegetables. And her birth was widely celebrated in the Digger community. And maybe you've been here before, Callie, I don't know, but I never saw you check in. So I'm so happy to know that you're here. Thank you so much. So let me begin today with the quote that I posted yesterday. It's from Stephen Batchelor's book, Beyond Buddhism. If you don't know Stephen Batchelor, he's a really interesting man. Spent most of his growing up years in a Tibetan monastery and really deeply familiar with the logic and the practices of Tibetan Buddhism, which he eventually left to produce a more secular practice. If you may be hearing my cat Duke, who's complaining about something. So here's the quote. No matter how probingly you look, you'll not find anything in this world that exists self-sufficiently by its own intrinsic nature, in its own right, independent of all else. Why? Because every single thing in this strange world of ours, from an elephant to the tiniest subatomic particle, is contingent on proximate, means nearby, and distant causes, on parts to which it can't be reduced, and on words and concepts that render it intelligible to the culture in a particular human culture. Duke, you have to go down. So to say this implies that there's actually, to say this implies emptiness. If no single thing exists self-sufficiently by its own intrinsic nature, it means that our ideas of things that we name, including ourself, don't actually exist in the way that we think of them, because they're made of everything else in the universe. They can't exist without them. So to say this implies that emptiness is the ground. It's a kind of ground reality. And there are two ways that we can think about it. We can think about it as a simple negation. You've never been here. Or we can think about it as a negation that opens the ground to admit something else, like an idea of God or consciousness or some transcendent power. In fact, it's a really simple negation. You're not here. You've never been here. Nothing's ever been here in the way that we think about it. He doesn't say that he's discovered a secret or an ultimate truth. He certainly doesn't say that it's important to negate the self. We all have an awareness. The body itself is aware. The mind is aware. The hands are aware. Eyes, ears, nose, awareness. The ego is the kind of organizing principle of all of it. He doesn't say we have to negate it, we have to kill it, we have to bury it. And he doesn't say whether the self exists or not. He appears to be saying that his awakening was a radical shift in perception. It's not that he leapt over a fence, and on the other side of it he inhabited a world that you and I don't. Not at all. Have you ever seen those two profiles of two faces looking at one another? And if you look at it long enough, you can see that the space in here actually is a lamp. And the two profiles are flipping the foreground and background, you can make the lamp appear, or you can make the two profiles appear. In fact, they're both appearing at the same time. So it's kind of like this radical shift gives him another way of looking at life at the same time. It's the same life, the same space that you and I are in, but he's had a radical shift in how he's seen it. So in this formulation, the self is a fiction that was never there. It just doesn't exist in any correspondence to an organ, to an inner armature, to a germ of self, which hops from body to body through time. Most of those ideas of reincarnation came from Hinduism. And when Buddhism was growing up, a lot of its explanations had to make sense to Hindus. And there was a movement afoot in ancient India where the Brahmins kind of tried to take over Buddhism when it got very popular. And they added all sorts of mythic encounters where Buddha met Brahma, who told him that he should teach. And, we see the same kind of stuff today. But hopefully we're moving beyond medieval views into a kind of clarity and logic of this present moment and what it stems from. So this is a very different way than imagining emptiness as some kind of state that we win by meditating. We meditate and meditate and meditate, and all of a sudden we pop into this other reality. And then we reify it as a precious object. That's a little bit what we do with enlightenment. It's a little bit what we do with anything that we can name. If I take my cup and I could break it down to a molecular level, take the ceramic, take the glaze, take the paint, there's no cup there. If I could take my hand apart, down to the nerves, the tissues, the blood, there's no hand in there. It's a construct. And our naming it gives it this notion of separability from the rest of it, but it's not true. If there was no oxygen or water, my hand wouldn't be here. If we were closer to the sun, my hand wouldn't be here. If there were no pollinating insects, my hand wouldn't be here. And certainly myself wouldn't be here. So while many Buddhists, myself included, began their practice in a kind of search for the kingdom of enlightenment, and we larded it with all sorts of mysterious qualities, and especially as a kind of pudgy, insecure adolescence. When I started reading about Zen, I thought this was going to be the magic sword. It was going to make me invulnerable to the insults of my friends. It was going to make me fatally attractive to the prettiest girls in my class. And maybe best of all, it was going to eradicate my ceaseless anxiety about everything. Buddha never said any of that. Even in the Heart Sutra, when it says that Avalokiteshvara perceived that all five skandhas, remember the skandhas are the heaps that the body is made out of, form, feeling, impulse, sensation, and consciousness, that he perceived that they were empty, that there was no germ of anything within them. It says, and he was saved from all suffering. For a while, first of all, that sentence, saved from all suffering, was not in the original sutra. It was added later by the Chinese. And so I got very excited as if I'd made a great discovery. And in the little Dharma chant books, which I keep in my Zendo to use, I whited out and was saved from all suffering because I was so smart. All these other people for centuries and centuries were idiots because I had cracked the code. But in point of fact, he didn't say all suffering ended. He said he was saved from all suffering. So when you save someone from drowning, you don't eradicate the ocean. You save them from drowning. And it's true that the understanding that things are empty saved Buddha from the consequences of suffering. It did not end suffering on earth. And that's a big misunderstanding in a lot of our practices. We keep thinking that, if I just get enlightened, all this crap is going to go away. I'm going to be Suzuki Roshi. I'm going to be the perfect human. I'm not going to be afflicted by these things anymore. That's a mental pet. As long as we have this body, and as long as we have nervous systems, as long as we have, existence in this world where we're afflicted by a stiff wind full of pepper, we're going to have anxiety. We're going to have stuff that's difficult to deal with. What Buddha showed us is how to deal with it. So, in a book called The Shorter Discourse on Emptiness, one of the earliest speeches of the Buddha, he was talking to somebody and he said, I mainly dwell by dwelling in emptiness. The guy asked him, how are you doing? What are you doing? He says, I mainly dwell by dwelling in emptiness. So first of all, mainly doesn't mean that he's permanently there. Mainly means there's an alternative. There are other alternatives. When I'm not dwelling in emptiness, I'm in the world of samsara like normal people. But by saying dwelling in emptiness, it's pretty clear that he's not discussing a separate reality where he exists after his enlightenment and the rest of us don't. It's more like dwelling in emptiness is a perspective, is a way of being in the world and a way of seeing the world, which is not different from the world itself. It's not like we suddenly filter out all the difficulties of the world and we're in the cotton candy of the poor. It's an option. The Shorter Discourse on Emptiness ends with this quote. It's really useful. To dwell in emptiness means to inhabit fully the embodied space of one's sensory experience. The embodied space of your sensory experience. But in a way that's no longer determined by habitual activity. So he's not saying we go anywhere. He's not saying we get rid of our senses. We get rid of all the inputs of the world and the receivers we have for them. He's saying something happens in terms of our habitual responses. And you remember in an earlier talk, we talked about the first noble truth, which was affliction. Stuff happens to us. I call it a wind full of pepper. Every living thing is affected by it. The second noble truth is samudaya, arising. Stuff arises, and the Buddha's not pretending that it doesn't arise. And we have habitual responses to it. It's like when the guy cuts us off in a car and we just want to give him the finger. Or her, as the state may be, just to be equally offensive. So to dwell in emptiness doesn't mean that we're not going to suffer any longer. Buddha didn't say that. As long as we have a body, we'll be prone to anxiety. We'll have the problems we've always had. We'll be more skillful about dealing with them. We'll be dealing with them in a bigger space. But we're not being completely transformed as people. We're not being moved to a new reality. This is it. So emptiness is not some ultimate truth. It's not some pill to dispel ignorance and enlighten us. Buddha's not saying we understand emptiness. What we do is we experience emptiness. It means coming back to earth, coming back to our bodies, claiming them, really being here. Because here is emptiness. We can think of emptiness as, pregnant energy which is continually giving birth to every object, thought, impulse, sensation that we can possibly imagine. This reality is not different from it. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The Heart Sutra reminds us of that over and over and over again. So when we do this, when we come back and we manage to check or hold our habitual responses, that's tantamount to seeing the world for the first time. Because one of the problems with language, one of the taxes that language puts on us, is once we call something a tree, we stop investigating it afresh. We don't see it each time. We go, oh yeah, tree. Leaves, fruit, bark, roots, birds, tree. That's a very expensive tax. That's a very reductive process. We benefit by it. We need language. We need to, we can't be stuck in trance states all the time. We couldn't feed ourselves. But we need to know that they're arbitrary. And we need to know that the words are not the things themselves, and the things themselves are not graspable. They're not graspable because they're composed of other things which are not them. A tree is composed of cellulose, water, chlorophyll. Name it, just keep going, keep going, keep going. The microbes in the soil that feed it. It's not a graspable entity. So this kind of way of not knowing, of being fresh without our reactivity, is a way of being, it's a way of being vitally alert. I keep saying we have no idea what makes a housefly. I mean, I know I'm weird this way, but I love houseflies. And they come, sometimes they land on my finger. And they're there, they're rubbing their little feet, they're rubbing their little wings, they're turning their heads this way and that. They inhabit a whole universe that I know nothing about. And yet I share it with them. They share it with me. They may not mean anything to me, but they mean something to emptiness, or it would not have generated them. So if I look at them without my small mind, if I look at them just as a phenomenon, they're miraculous. Where'd they come from? So emptiness, if we think about it a minute, emptiness contains every kind of contradiction. It contains every question and every answer. It's not bounded by the limits of logic or syntax or grammar. It's all there. It's all of it. And our reality is like having a pint glass and trying to fill it with a gallon pitcher. It can't contain it all. So the Buddha never talks about getting rid of these polarities. He doesn't talk about getting rid of contradictions. He doesn't say that because they're useful. As a matter of fact, they're indispensable. And Stephen Batchelor likens them to a pole that a tightrope walker carries that allows him to correct his balance and take the next step. And it's pretty obvious that in our ancient twisted karma, when we were half chimpanzee and as we grew and evolved, these polarities helped us survive. Seeing things as separate, as isolate, allowed us to struggle and win the battle for survival. So it's not that we have to reject dualities in favor of some hypothetical non-duality where we try to exist without feeling, without nothing, a light bulb that may be on or off, usually off. To choose between duality and non-duality is an invented choice. They both exist, both and. So Buddha doesn't tell us to reject them. He suggests that we can live with them more lightly, more fluidly, more ironically. The danger doesn't lie in the duality itself. That's like saving a guy from drowning by emptying the ocean. That's not what it is. The danger lies in how we use thinking about duality to reinforce our ego choices, our craving, our fear, our anger. That's how we get to politics 2021. It's not that differences of opinion don't exist, but when those differences of opinion are defended and backed up by our egocentric point of views and treated as if they're matters of life and death, then we have the chicken shit instead of the chicken salad. So the Buddha demonstrates we can configure ourselves in a couple of different ways. We can be certain about everything. We can be confident of our identity and our place, unhesitatingly following our beliefs, sure that we've got it all worked out. I'm particularly prone to this failing. My daughter once said to me, "Dad, it's that you can say bullshit with such confidence that tricks us." So I have to be careful about that. Anyway, that's one way that we can be, or we can think of ourselves as on perpetually shifting ground. From moment to moment, we don't know what the next moment's going to be. And we have to be available, both within ourselves and within what's coming to us, to be able to spin on a dime, to adjust, to rethink. Because that's really the nature of what the world is. It's moment after moment after moment. They're not replicable. This is what Buddha said. The happiness and joy that arise conditioned by life, meaning our senses bouncing against the world. The happiness and joy that arise conditioned by life, that's the delight of life. That life is impermanent, difficult, and changing, that's the tragedy of life. The removal and abandonment of grasping for life, that's the emancipation. It's a closed fist or an open fist. So to leave home, so when you look at it in that light, to leave home and be a mendicant and be homeless doesn't mean that you have to repudiate your home. Doesn't mean that the home is an inferior state to the monastery. That's not the point. That's not what he's saying. Given everything he's spoken of, wouldn't it be more consonant with what he said to change the way you're relating to one's home? To change the way you're relating to the world of men and manners and mores and politics and all of that, instead of pretending that it doesn't exist. Buddha is looking to engender a change at our core. He's trying to model it, show us that it's possible, and in the midst of all this turbulence and all of this stuff, shift our perception so that we can see the profiles of the lamp and the outline of the lamp and the inlines of the faces, and that we can shift back and forth fluidly. So when we get serious about our practice, we say we've entered the stream. And there's a tendency to think, oh, we're in the stream, let's go with the flow. But that's not what Buddha's about. Buddha's not talking about going with the flow. He's quite specific about not going with the flow. The flow represents our habitual responses. The flow represents the downhill, the easiest, the path of least resistance. That's where our reactions take us. And Buddha talks all the time about our habitual reactions, not about the stuff that's afflicting us, not blaming the people who trigger us and get us angry, but our habitual reactions. That's our prison. That's where we're chained. And they don't change the straw. To go against the stream and to go against our innate reactivity is the weapon we use to fight the army of Mara. And you remember, Mara was the temptress or the tempter that challenged Buddha during his night of enlightenment. And the army of Mara is composed of sensual desire, discontent, hunger, thirst, craving, sloth, and torpor, fear, doubt, and hypocrisy. It reminds me of an elevator operator in a department store. 6th floor, sloth and torpor, fear, doubt, and hypocrisy. Obstinacy, gain, renown, honor, and ill-gotten fame, the extolling of oneself and the disparaging of others. Everything evolved from what came immediately before it. So we can, instead of judging, we can understand these as forces that we dragged along with us from evolution. They must have once been very important. Just like once upon a time, it must have been very important to be very cautious of strangers. If your people lived in the land between two streams, and you knew there was enough carrying capacity for your people, and a stranger came in and was hunting, he was actually a threat to the existence of the tribe. At one point, that insight was fundamental, was necessary. It's not necessary now. So instead of judging these forces and saying, oh my God, no, we can't take that, we can't have contradiction, we can't have duality, we've got to be in the bliss-ninny non-duality place all the time, we need to be kind and understand that our instincts are deeply embedded in our bodies, our history, our karma, our brains, and they enabled our ancestors to compete and thrive and bring us here. We're not separate from those things. If we were just supposed to go with the flow, why do we practice the rigor of Zen? Why do we sit up straight and pay so much attention to our posture and our mudra and our breathing? Why do we get up early in the morning? We're not supposed to go with the flow. By stabilizing our attention, by training the junkyard dogs in our psyches and the monkeys in our psyches, we gain the freedom to actually see these forces of Mara, these thoughts, feelings, emotions, and beliefs that just arise naturally. They're not our fault. We don't have to be afraid of them. And we don't have to fear that if we talk about them, we're revealing some insufficiency in our spiritual training. Dukkha happens to every living thing. Affliction. Samudaya, arising, happens to every living thing. It's what you do with it. It's the next step, the third noble truth, the containing. So we can maintain all these things that come up as transient, impersonal events if we don't break the container. The container is the third noble truth, Nirodha. It's the wall that people built around a fire pit. And if we don't energize with these things by identifying with them, by attaching our ego energy to them, they'll just fade away. And our efforts, our rigor to resist the stream and to just sit without feeding them is like letting our karma play on emptiness. And they rise, and we watch them. They disappear, they fade, they go away. So we're never going to fully get rid of reactivity. It's going to be an ongoing struggle. We have these nervous systems. We have this flesh. They're all part of what it means to be human. And reactivity is not conquered by eliminating every reaction from our minds, but from developing practices which become impervious to their assault. Developing practices which become impervious to their assault. Learning to maintain your balance, learning to maintain your seat, learning that you can contain whatever comes up. That's what you model for other people. That's the dignity that the Buddha modeled for us. The bars are full of people who are running away from what's arising. Marriages are being broken by affairs all the time, by people running away from what's arising. Drug addicts are running away from what's arising. Compulsive shoppers, compulsive gamblers are running away from what's arising. There's no dignity in any of it. The Buddha taught us how to face the peppered wind with dignity and how to contain it. And then once it was contained, he gave us the Eightfold Path into the world. If we don't feed these things, they will die down. And the potential to live in that manner, in control, free of our reactions, free to act in a way that are not determined by habitual responses, that's our freedom. That allows us access to reason. What's the best thing to do in this moment? What's the smartest thing to do in this moment? Which is actually the way we build the future. This space of being able to be free of reaction, to choose what's best and most logical way to behave in this moment. This is what Buddha called nirvana. It's not a foreign kingdom. It's not a fence we have to hurdle. We break the chains of our reaction by stabilizing ourselves, by having the courage to face our junkyard dogs and our monkeys, clean up their messes, strengthen ourselves by sitting and meditating, and learn to dwell in emptiness. That's everything I know about Buddhism. I think that's enough for now. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace.